"Clear them off," the man in the pale gray coat said, and he said it to my friend Edrin the way a man flicks a crumb off a tablecloth. "All of them. I want the rail to myself." I was 30 feet down the same stone balustrade, my own boots planted on my own square of cobble, and I heard it carry clean across the forecourt because the man wanted it to carry. He had the kind of voice that had never once been asked to repeat itself. Edrin did not so much as shift the weight of his rifle. He stood at the head of the public viewing terrace of Raythorn House the way he stood every morning of his life, eyes level on the middle distance, the bearskin throwing a hard black shadow down the bridge of his nose, and he gave the order exactly as much of himself as he gave the pigeons, which was nothing at all. I want to tell you what happened on that terrace because people who saw the end of it think they understand it, and they do not. They saw a rich man turn purple, and a great many people stay where they stood. They think that was the story. The story was the 40 minutes before that, when one guardsman decided that a public rail was going to stay public, and held a line that was made of nothing but his own stillness until the whole house came up behind him to make it real. My name is Corporal Winsarrow. I have stood the Raythorn forecourt for 9 years. I am telling you about my friend. The terrace is the people's ground, and that is not a figure of speech. It is written. Raythorn House sits behind its black and gold gates above the city, and across the front of it runs a long stone forecourt open to the sky, and along the near edge of that forecourt runs the old balustrade where, for 200 years, anyone at all has been allowed to stand and watch the morning change of the watch. Anyone. A duchess and a delivery boy get the same 6 inches of cold stone rail to lean their elbows on. There is no ticket, there is no rope for the better sort. The founder of the house, and I will get to the founder, because he is the whole hinge of this, set it down in the charter that the front of his house belonged to the eyes of the people, and that the gentleman who tried to buy a better view of it had mistaken what the house was for. That morning the rail was full the way it always is in fair weather. School parties, a man in a wheelchair with a flask of tea wedged beside him, 2 old women who I would later learn came every single Thursday and had for 11 years, a young father with a small girl up on his shoulders, her mittened hands knotted in his hair, the pair of them pointing at the bearskins. Phones, of course, a forest of them, held up, filming the watch as it formed on the gravel in front of us. An ordinary morning. The kind we are proud of precisely, because nothing about it is supposed to be remarkable. Then the gray coat arrived. He came up the public steps with 2 men a half-pace behind him, both in dark suits cut close enough that I marked them for hired muscle before they reached the top. The man himself I will call the patron, because that is the word the city used for him afterward, and it is kinder than what the city used at the time. He was a financier, one of those men who owns the leases under things, the ground under the shops, the paper under the loans, and the city had spent a decade learning to be careful around him. He stopped at the head of the terrace, looked along the crowded rail the way you look at a misfiled drawer, and his face did a thing I have seen on exactly that kind of face before. A flat little flinch of disbelief that the world had been allowed to fill up with people before he got there. He walked straight to the center of the rail, to the spot with the cleanest line down the gravel to the steps of the house, the photograph spot, the spot the small girl on her father's shoulders happened to be occupying, and he turned to Edrin and gave his order. "Clear them off. I want the rail to myself." And Edrin gave him the pigeon's share of his attention, which was none. I have to tell you what that costs, because the people filming did not understand it, and neither, I think, did the patron. We are not allowed to speak first. We are not allowed to turn, to engage, to defend ourselves with a clever line. Our whole trade is the refusal of reaction. You can shout in a guardsman's face for an hour, and the discipline is that the face does not answer, because the moment the face answers, the man has won. He has made the KingsGuard his to provoke. So Edrin's stillness was not him ignoring the patron out of contempt. It was him doing his actual job, which in that first minute was to be a wall, and let the wall mean what walls mean. The patron was not a man who had ever lost to a wall. "I don't think you heard me," he said, and he said it louder for the phones now, because he had clocked the phones and decided they were his audience and not ours. "I'm told this is a public terrace. Fine, I'm the public, I'm asking the public to move." He smiled at his own little turn of phrase. One of the suited men chuckled on cue. "I have a luncheon at the house at noon. I'd like a clean view and a clean photograph before then without—" He moved his gloved hand down the rail at the school party, the wheelchair, the Thursday women, the father and the small girl, all of this. Nobody moved, but I watched the rail hear him, and I watched the rail begin to do the math that frightened people do, which is the arithmetic of who is allowed to make whom uncomfortable. The young father's hand came up and folded over his daughter's mittened fist. One of the Thursday women lifted her chin a half-inch, the way you do when you have decided not to be the first to flinch, but are not certain you can hold it. The man with the wheelchair set his flask down very quietly, as a man does when he thinks he may need both hands free for his wheels. That is the part the clips never show you. The crowd did not stand firm out of courage. The crowd stood firm because one man at the head of the rail in a black bearskin and white gloves had not moved a single muscle, and as long as he did not move, the rail could tell itself it did not have to either. The patron turned fully to Edrin now. He had found the thing in the frame that was refusing him, and men like that always do find it, and they always go straight at it. "You," he said, "toy soldier. I'll make this simple for you." He took a step closer, into the space we are not supposed to let them have, close enough that I started moving my own weight off my heels without quite deciding to. "Move these people back, or I will be having a word at that luncheon about who's standing this gate, and you will be reassigned to count spoons in a cellar by supper. Do you understand the words coming out of my mouth?" And Edrin, who had not moved, moved. He brought his eyes down off the middle distance, slowly, the way a clock hand moves, so that you only know it has happened after it has happened, and he looked the patron full in the face for the first time. He did not speak. He just looked at him. And the patron, who had threatened to have a man buried in a cellar, took a half step back before he caught himself. That was the moment the morning stopped being ordinary, and the patron, God help him, took it for a victory. Because he thought the look meant fear. He thought the toy soldier had finally understood whose morning this was, and he turned half toward his men with the small, satisfied air of a man who has located the lever. "Good," he said. "There we are. Now." "Sir," Edrin's voice when it came was so quiet that the front rank of the rail leaned in to catch it, and so level that it took the heat clean out of the air. "We are allowed to speak. People think we cannot, that we will be marched off for opening our mouths, and that is not true. We speak when speaking is the duty, and we speak the way the duty requires, which is short, low, and without a grain of give. This is the public terrace of Raythorn House. Every person on this rail has the right to stand here. I will not ask them to move, and I would ask you to step back from the line." He had said more in 15 seconds than I had heard Edrin say on post in 9 years. And he had said it without 1 degree of rise in his voice, which is the thing that undid the patron, because the patron had a whole strategy built for shouting and no strategy at all for a man who simply, flatly, would not be moved. "You'll ask me," the patron repeated. He laughed, but it came out a half-second late, the way a laugh does when a man is buying time. "Do you have the faintest idea who I am? I have lunched in that house." He stabbed a gloved finger up at the gold-stoned front of Raythorn, "more times than you've had hot dinners. I sit on the boards. I hold the paper on half this city. And you are going to stand there in your fancy dress hat and tell me that I have to share a rail with." The finger swept the school party again, a coachload of children and a man with a thermos. "Yes, sir," Edrin said, "that is what I am telling you. I want to be fair to the man, even now. The patron was not a cartoon. He genuinely could not process it. In his world, a thing he wanted was a thing he had. The only variable was the price, and he had never once met a price he could not pay. So when a guardsman told him no, and the no had no price attached to it, no number he could reach for, the gears in him simply spun. You could watch it happen. And a man whose gears are spinning does the most dangerous thing such a man can do, which is to decide that the obstacle is personal, and that humiliating it will fix the machine. "What's your name?" he said, not a question. He took out his phone, not to film, he had men for that, but to write, thumb poised. "Your name and your number, soldier. I'm going to enjoy this." Edrin gave him neither. He had returned his eyes to the middle distance the instant his piece was said, back to the wall, and the patron found himself once more talking to a black bearskin and a brass row of buttons that gave him exactly nothing to push against. I saw the color start up the patron's neck. What he did next he did because he was losing and could not stand to be seen losing in front of the phones that he himself had decided were his. He stepped sideways to the small girl on her father's shoulders, the one in the photograph spot, and he put his gloved hand flat on the young father's shoulder and pushed, not hard, but with the casual proprietary shove of a man clearing furniture. "You, down the end. Take the child and go on. There's a good fellow, you've had your look." The father stumbled half a step. The little girl grabbed 2 fistfuls of his hair and made the small sharp sound a child makes when the ground moves under a parent. And I felt the whole rail go tight as a drum skin, because now it was not a rich man being rude to a soldier. It was a stranger's hand on a man holding a child, and that is a different thing entirely. That is the thing that turns a watching crowd into something with a temperature. And here is what Edrin did, and here is the whole of him in one motion. He did not lunge. He did not shout. He took 2 measured paces, the parade pace, the one drilled into the meat of us until it is more natural than walking, and he placed himself, his whole red and black self, in the 18 inches of space between the patron and the father. Not touching the patron, not touching anyone. Just their asterisk, a wall relocated, his rifle held exactly as the manual holds it, his eyes coming down once more to the patron's face and staying there. "Hands off the gentleman, sir." Low, level. "Step back to the open end of the rail. You are welcome to a place on this terrace. You are not welcome to another man's." The patron snatched his hand back, as though the father's coat had burned it. And in the snatching back he understood, finally, that he was not going to win this with weight, and his face went from purple to something colder and far worse, because a man like that, when he cannot crush a thing in front of him, does not give up. He reaches past it. He goes up the chain to find the hand that owns the thing, and he pulls. "All right," he said softly, and the softness was the worst of it. He put the phone to his ear. "All right, we'll do it the grown-up way." He turned his back on Edrin, on the rail, on all of us, and he walked 6 paces toward the great doors of the house with the phone at his ear, and I heard the start of it carry back across the gravel. "Marcus, it's me. I'm standing in your forecourt, and one of your tin soldiers has just laid hands near a guest and refused a perfectly reasonable. Yes, no, I want him gone asterisk today. I want the rail cleared, and I want to know why I'm being treated like a tourist at a house where I hold the yes asterisk. I'll wait." He turned back around with the phone still at his ear, and he smiled at Edrin, and it was a patient, lethal little smile. The smile of a man who has just sent for the owner. "Now we wait," he said to Edrin, to all of us. "Now we'll see whose terrace it is." I will not pretend my own stomach did not drop, because I knew the name he had said. Marcus was the working name of the steward of the house, the man who runs Raythorn from the inside, who answers to the Lord Chamberlain and to no one else below the king, and who could, with one word, have Edrin off that rail, and the whole crowd politely dispersed, and the patron handed the empty terrace he had bought 100 lunches to feel entitled to. The patron had not bluffed. He had a real line into the real building, and he had just pulled it. And Edrin, and this is the thing I have never been able to explain to anyone who only saw the clip, Edrin did not change by one hair. He had stepped back into his place at the head of the rail. The little girl had gone still on her father's shoulders, watching him the way children watch something they have decided is safe. The Thursday women had not moved. The man with the wheelchair had picked his flask back up, and Edrin stood there in the wind off the city with a financier promising to have the building itself take his post away from him, and he held the rail. He held it because that was the duty, and the duty did not have a price either, and it did not check first to see who was coming up the stairs. What came up the stairs was not what the patron had ordered, but it took its time getting there, and the waiting was the longest part of all. Let me tell you about the rail itself, because you cannot understand why the next 20 minutes went the way they went without understanding what that rail asterisk is. When the first Lord of Raythorn raised the house, the man we still call the founder, he had come up from nothing. The story we are told as recruits, the story they make sure we are told before we are ever trusted with the forecourt, is that he had been a foot soldier himself, a man who as a boy had been turned away from the gates of a great house because he was not the right sort to stand and look, and had carried the sting of it his whole life. So when he had his own house and his own gates and his own forecourt with the finest view in the city laid out before it, he wrote into the charter of the place, the actual founding paper, kept under glass in the long gallery, that the front terrace of the house would belong to the eyes of the people forever, that no man, however great, could buy or clear or close it, and that the guard who stood it answered first to that line, and only second to anyone who came to break it. The view belongs to everyone, the charter says, in the old phrasing, asterisk, and the man who would keep it for himself has mistaken a house for a mirror. Recruits laugh a little when they first hear it. It sounds like a pretty motto, the sort of thing carved over a door. It stops sounding like a motto the first time you stand the rail and feel the whole weight of 200 years of ordinary mornings resting on your one square of cobble. Edrin had felt that weight every morning for 7 years. He was not holding a line out of stubbornness. He was holding the oldest promise the house had ever made, and he knew, better than the patron, better than I did in that moment, that the house had not stayed great by breaking its own oldest promises for the men who lunched there. But the patron knew the building, and a building is not a charter. A building is full of men, and men can be tired, or careful, or afraid of a financier who holds the paper on half the city. So when the great doors opened and the steward came out onto the top step, I felt the rail hold its breath, and I will not lie, I held mine. The steward was a spare, gray, unhurried man in a dark morning coat, the keys of his office on a thin chain. He had run the inside of Raythorn for 20 years. He came down the steps with a private secretary a pace behind him, and a single member of the house security detail behind asterisk or asterisk, and the patron's whole body changed when he saw them coming. He straightened. He put the phone away. He arranged his face into the warm, equal, clubroom smile of one important man greeting another. "Marcus," he said, opening his arms, "thank you, I'm sorry to drag you out. Honestly, it's nothing. It's a 5-second thing. Your man here just needs to understand that when I'm hosting at the house, I can't be made to jostle for a rail with a school trip. If you'll just have him clear a span of the terrace, I'll forget the whole, and we should talk about the lease on the river block while I'm here. I've had a thought." And the steward stopped 2 steps from the bottom, where he could see the whole rail at once. The children, the Thursday women, the man with the flask, the father with the small girl still up on his shoulders, the forest of phones, and Edrin standing his ground at the head of all of it. And the steward did a thing I will remember to the end of my service. He looked first at Edrin, not at the patron, at Edrin, a long, reading look. And Edrin met it for 1 second and gave him the smallest motion of the chin toward the father and the child, that's where it started, and then put his eyes back to the middle distance. His piece said, the matter handed up the chain where it belonged. He had done his whole job. He had held the line until someone with the authority to settle it arrived, and now he handed it cleanly over and went back to being a wall, and the trust in that, the trust that the chain above him would hold the same line he had, was the bravest thing on that terrace, because it was a trust the patron was betting his whole afternoon against. "Tell me what happened," the steward said, to Edrin, quietly, as if the patron were not standing 3 feet away with his arms still half open. "A man on the public terrace asked me to clear the rail for his private use, sir," Edrin said. "I declined. He put his hand on a guest, the smallest nod at the father, to move him from the line. I stepped between them and asked him to take an open place. He has the same welcome here as anyone. He does not have more." That is a slanted little account," the patron broke in, the smile thinning. "I touched no one. I moved no one. I made a reasonable request of a public servant and he refused it and got physical. And frankly, Marcus, the question isn't what happened. The question is whether you employ men who think they can tell me where I may stand in a house I keep half afloat. Now, are you going to clear my rail? Or are we going to have a much longer and much more expensive conversation about my support for this institution?" There it was, the bill laid on the table. "Do as I say or I take away my money and my favor and the warmth of my powerful friendship, and let us both be adults about what that costs you. It is the oldest pressure in the world, and it has worked on better houses than ours." The steward let the silence run 3 full seconds. Down the rail, the small girl whispered something into her father's ear, and he shushed her, gently, and the sound of it was the only sound in the whole forecourt. Then the steward turned to the patron, and he was still unhurried and still gray and still spare. And when he spoke in the same low, even register Edrin had used, and I understood, hearing it, that it was not a coincidence, that the house taught it to every man who served it, high and low, the level voice that does not rise and does not bend, and that the patron had now heard it twice and was about to hear it a 3rd time, from the very top of the building he had been so sure would save him. "I am going to do something for you," the steward said, "that I do not often do. I am going to walk you to the charter." It was not what the patron expected. He had braced for a fight he knew how to win, leverage against leverage. Who needs whom? The lease on the river block dangled and withdrawn. He had not braced for a courteous old man inviting him indoors to read. "I don't need to read your founding paper, Marcus. I need a clear rail." "You do, though," the steward said, mild as milk, "because you have made this a question of who has authority over this terrace, and I find it is always cleaner in these matters to let the man see exactly where the authority lives. It is not in me. It is not in the Lord Chamberlain. It is certainly not in the corporal, who is merely the place where the line happens to be standing this morning. Come and see." And he turned and went back up the steps, and the patron, because a man like that cannot abide being walked away from, cannot stand to let the last word belong to someone else, went after him. His 2 suited men made to follow, and the house security woman stepped smoothly into their path with a smile and a flat palm, and they stopped, and that was the first small click of the larger machine beginning to close. I did not know it yet. I only knew that the patron had gone inside, and that Edrin still stood the rail, and that the morning was somehow not over. What happened in the long gallery I had from 3 people afterward, and they agreed on every particular, so I will give it to you as it was. The steward walked the patron the length of the gallery to the glass case where the founding charter is kept, the real one, the founder's own hand gone brown on the page, and he did not lecture. He simply set a gloved finger lightly on the glass above the line and let the patron read it for himself. The view belongs to everyone, and the man who would keep it for himself has mistaken a house for a mirror. And below it, in the part the public placards never bother to quote, the working clause, that the front terrace was held in trust for the people in perpetuity, that no officer, steward, or guest of the house had the power to close, clear, or reserve it, and that any servant of the house who held that line against pressure of whatever source was to be upheld by the house entire. You see the difficulty, the steward said. It is not that I will not clear the rail for you. It is that I cannot. I have no more power to give you that terrace than I have to give you the sky over it. The corporal you wanted reassigned to count spoons did not refuse you out of insolence. He refused you out of the single oldest instruction this house possesses, the one that sits above my office and above the Lord Chamberlain's. If I disciplined him for it, I would be the one in breach, and I would not survive the breakfast. The patron read it twice. I am told you could watch him try even then to find the price in it, to find the lever, the boards, the lease, the man above the steward who could be reached and reasoned with, the number that would make the line bend. And there was no number, because the line had been written by a dead man 200 years gone specifically, so that no living man's number could reach it. That, I have come to think, is the whole genius of the founder. He did not trust his own heirs to be brave, so he took the bravery out of their hands and put it in a paper under glass, where a frightened steward or a tired chamberlain could not give it away even if a financier leaned on him hard enough, because it was no longer theirs to give. The patron's last move was the move of every powerful man who has just discovered the floor of his power. He went over the steward's head. He took out his phone, there in the gallery, and he called a name above the steward, a member of the house's governing council, a man he genuinely knew, a man who had genuinely taken his money for genuine good causes, and he made his case loud and fast and final. That he was being humiliated, that a guardsman had assaulted a guest, that the house's most generous friend was being told to queue with schoolchildren, and that there would be consequences, real ones, to the house's funding and to certain careers within it, unless someone with sense reached down and fixed this in the next 10 minutes. And here is where the system rallied, and it did not rally with sirens or a convoy or a line of soldiers, the way these stories are supposed to. It rallied with a single returned call, and that call came not to the patron but to the steward, and it came from the Lord Chamberlain himself, the head of the whole household, who had been reached by the council member the patron had so carefully cultivated. The steward took the call standing beside the glass case, and he listened, and then he held the phone out to the patron. "He would like to speak with you," he said. The patron took it like a man taking a gift. He was certain, you could see he was certain, that the cavalry had finally arrived on his side of the field. What the Lord Chamberlain said to him, the steward heard only one side of, but the patron's face gave the other side away, and the secretary wrote it all down within the hour because she could see what it was. The Lord Chamberlain did not shout. The Lord Chamberlain was, by every account, perfectly, lethally courteous. He thanked the patron warmly for his years of generous support. He said the house valued him. And then he said, in the level register, the house register, the one the patron had now heard from a corporal, a steward, and the head of the household in the space of one morning, and had finally to understand was not 3 men being difficult but one institution speaking with one voice, that the public terrace was not the steward's to clear, nor the chamberlain's, nor the king's, that the corporal on the rail had done precisely what the house required of him and would be commended for it, not reassigned, and that if the patron found the terms of public access at Raythorn House disagreeable, the house would, with real regret, understand entirely if he chose to take his custom and his luncheons to a venue more to his liking, and would think no less of him for it. It was the most expensive sentence the patron had ever been on the wrong end of, and it cost the house nothing to say, because the house had decided 200 years ago that it would rather lose the man than the rail. The phone came back to the steward. The patron stood very still in the long gallery for a moment, in front of the brown ink under the glass, and then he said the only honest thing he said all day. He'd actually let me walk. He would walk you to the door himself, the steward said, not unkindly, and hold it. That is rather the point of the charter, sir. It means no one ever has to be brave about it. The bravery is already done. It was done by a man who has been dead 200 years, so that a corporal on a cold morning would not have to find it fresh. He gestured toward the doors and the light of the forecourt beyond them. "Shall we go back out? I think you owe a young father an apology, and I think you would feel better for the giving of it than you expect." Out on the terrace, we had no idea any of that had happened. We knew only that the patron had gone in with the air of a man sending for the headsman, and that the longer he stayed gone, the harder the rail held its breath. The two suited men stood near the steps, hemmed politely by the house security woman, and looked increasingly like men who had begun to suspect the day was not going to go the way they had been paid for. The little girl had grown bored of being still and was now narrating the pigeons to her father in a clear, high voice. The Thursday women had produced from somewhere a paper bag of mints and were passing them down the rail. And one of them, I learned her name later, it was a good name, but I will keep it for her, leaned in toward the man with the flask and said, loud enough for Edrin to hear it, "He held, didn't he? The young one, he held." Edrin did not react, but I, 30 feet down, saw the corner of his jaw, and I knew him, and I knew he had heard it, and I knew what it was worth to him. Then the great doors opened, and the patron came back out, and he came out a different shape than he went in. He came down the steps a half-pace behind the steward, which is not a place a man like that ever willingly stands, and his face had gone through purple and white and out the far side into something quieter and more human than I think it had worn in years. He walked the length of the terrace, past the school party, past the Thursday women and their mints, past the man with the flask, and the rail watched him come the way you watch weather you cannot predict. He stopped in front of the young father. The father pulled his daughter's mittened hands gently down from his hair and held her ankles and stood very straight, not hostile, just braced, the way a man braces when he does not know which way a thing is going to break. "I put my hand on you," the patron said. The whole forecourt heard it because the wind had dropped and because he did not try to make it small. "In front of your girl, to move you off a rail you had every right to stand at. I was wrong to do it, and I am sorry for it, and I am sorrier she saw it." He looked up at the child, who looked back down at him with the frank, merciless calm of the very young. "You keep the spot, miss," he said. "It's a good one, it's the best one. You've better taste than I have." And the small girl, who did not know she was the hinge of anything, who knew only that a grown-up had said something to her, gave him a grave little nod, as if granting a petition. And the rail, 200 strangers who had stood firm for 40 minutes on nothing but a guardsman's stillness, let out its held breath all at once, and it was not a cheer. It was better than a cheer. It was the sound a crowd makes when it has been afraid it would have to be brave and has just learned it does not, because the thing that protects it was built long ago and built to last and has held one more time. The patron took his place at the open end of the rail, the worst spot, the far end, the one with the street lamp half in the way, and he stood there with the schoolchildren and the Thursday women and the man with the flask, and he watched the change of the watch like anyone else, and when it was over he did not have his clean photograph, and I do not think he wanted one any more. He never lunched at Raythorn House again. That part the city got right. What the city mostly got wrong, in the weeks of clips and comment and the short brilliant fame of a thing seen by 500,000 phones, was *Y. They told it as the rich man humbled, the financier put in his place, the great brought low, and that is the easy story and it is not the true one. The patron was not brought low by a guardsman. The guardsman did not bring anyone low. Edrin held a line, exactly as far as a man on a rail is meant to hold it, and not 1 inch further, and then he handed it up the chain and trusted the chain to be made of the same iron he was. That was the risk. That was the whole of it. He bet that the house above him would hold the line he had held, and the house, through a gray steward and a courteous chamberlain and a dead man's hand under glass, did. The steward came down the rail before he went back in, and he stopped in front of Edrin, and he did not make a speech. "You knew I might walk out here and clear them," he said quietly. "When you handed it up, you knew I might be the tired one or the careful one. And you handed it up anyway." "You're the steward of the house, sir," Edrin said, eyes forward. "The charter says the house upholds the man on the line. I stood on the charter. I'd have looked a fool standing on it if I didn't believe the rest of you were standing on it too." The steward looked at him a moment longer. "We were," he said. "We will be. Carry on, corporal. And he went up the steps and the doors closed and the morning was an ordinary morning again, which is the highest thing it could possibly have become. I asked Edrin about it once, weeks later off the rail, the two of us out of the red and black and into plain coats with 2 mugs going cold between us. I asked him what went through him in that first minute, when the man in the gray coat told him to clear the rail and he gave it nothing. Whether he was angry, whether he was afraid, when the phone came out and the threat about the cellar landed. He thought about it the way he thinks about everything, which is longer than you expect and then all at once. I wasn't holding the rail against him, he said. That's what people don't see. I wasn't even thinking about him, not really. I was thinking about the Thursday ladies and the lad with the flask and that little girl up on her dad's shoulders and the 200 years of mornings exactly like it, all of them standing behind me at that rail whether they knew it or not. A man like that, he thinks the contest is him against me. It never is. The contest is whether the promise is real or whether it was only ever pretty words over a door. He turned his mug a quarter turn on the table. My whole job, the only job, was to act as if the promise was real, to stand as if it would hold. Because the strange thing about a promise like that, the only thing that makes it real is somebody standing as if it already is. The charter can't stand itself up. It needed a man on the cobbles to stand as if it could, long enough for everyone above him to remember they'd meant it. I have stood that rail 1,000 mornings since, in the rain and the wind and the flat gray cold, with my own square of cobble under my own boots, watching the Duchess and the delivery boy lean their elbows on the same 6 inches of stone. And I think about that more than I have ever told him. The view belongs to everyone. It is a small thing and it is the whole thing. And it stays everyone's not because no powerful man ever comes up the public steps and decides he would like it for himself. They come. They will always come, but because, on the morning one of them does, there is a man at the head of the rail in a black bearskin who has decided, before the man even opens his mouth, that the promise is real. That is the post. That is the whole of the post. And my friend Edrin stood it the way it was meant to be stood, on the morning it mattered, and the house stood behind him, and the rail is still everyone's. It always will be. That, finally, is what the charter is for.